Welcome to World Mycotoxin Report Impact 2021, a webinar brought to you by BIOMIN and Romer Labs. My name is Joshua Davis and I am Communications Manager at Romer Labs. In addition to hosting this wonderful webinar year after year, I also have the privilege of producing the Romer Labs Mycotoxin Minute, our weekly look at interesting stats and facts about mycotoxins. It's good to be with you. I'd like to welcome today's three panelists to the webinar. First up on our panel is Alexandro Marchioro, Senior Mycotoxin Expert at BIOMIN. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm fine. It's a pleasure to be here today.
It's good to have you. You know, Alex, at this point, I'd probably ask you about all the wonderful places you traveled over the last year, but with all the coronavirus restrictions, of course, you've probably been doing a lot of sitting at home like the rest of us. That said, what are some of the main mycotoxin concerns that you've been hearing about?
Yeah, it's true. We work a lot from home, and the corona crisis brought us alternatives, ways to keep in touch with the market, you know, like this one, web. And however, problems related to mycotoxin contamination continue to appear during the past year. And today we are going to present a lot of data on contamination profiles that we found.
All right, great. Well, welcome back. It's good to see you. I'd also like to welcome back Anneliese Müller, Product Manager for Mycotoxins at BIOMIN.
Hi, Josh. My pleasure to be here. How's it going?
I'm doing great, thanks. And I'm also glad to be here. Is there anything in particular that stands out about this year's survey results?
I mean, I have to admit, most of the surveys really interesting, but as last year, I'm a big fan of the emerging mycotoxins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the emerging mycotoxins, those ones that you may not always test for, that still could cause problems, right?
Yes, exactly. I think it's a topic we should pay attention to.
Well, good. And if I understand correctly, you'll be saying a little bit more about that later, right?
Exactly.
We're looking forward to that. Good to have you here.
Thanks.
And I'd also like to welcome my colleague Nowe Kogelnik, Product Manager for Mycotoxin Rapid Solutions and ELISA at Romer Labs, who is also joining us here for the first time.
Hi, Josh. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, Nowe. And if I'm not mistaken, you've been more than a little busy lately, haven't you?
That's right. We've rolled out a new product, Aggregation Pro Reader test kits for the rapid detection of mycotoxin. I will be talking about it a bit later in the webinar.
Well, that's great. I'm sure that we're all looking forward to hearing more about it. And we'll certainly talk about it a bit later. But before we jump into the webinar, I just want to make a few announcements to our audience. I want to remind you that this is an interactive webinar. And when you open the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find a menu for audio, visual, and other technical settings within the webinar platform. You can ask a question at any time throughout the session, so please feel free to enter questions for our speakers and for the Q&A session later on. If we can't get to your question over the course of the webinar, we may contact you by email afterwards with an answer. We want to hear from you, so please don't be shy. So without further ado, let's get into the survey. Alex, tell us, what can you say about the survey this time around?
Well, as you know, the BIOMIN Mycotoxin Survey is part of the technical service we offer to our customers. And we collect data from their feed materials samples to help them to understand which mycotoxins are found, at which concentrations, and the potential threats to their animals. So based on the data, we can give tailored recommendations regarding the most suitable product and proper dosage for complete and cost-effective mycotoxin risk management. So let's have a look at the numbers. So BIOMIN run this survey every year since 2004. In 2020, we tested more than 21,000 samples on finished feed and raw materials. And we performed more than 96,000 analyses. So this data came from 79 countries. This gives us a pretty good picture of the worldwide occurrence of mycotoxins. But let's go through into this topic with more details and have a look at the worldwide contamination. So let me explain how to read this map. For all regions, we listed the prevalence for the main mycotoxins, analyzed in the boxes. You can see how many samples tested positive for aflatoxin, zearalenone, deoxynivalenol, T2 toxin, fumonisins, and ochratoxin A. In this world map, the subregions of the world are colored according to the percentage of the samples above the risk threshold. So worldwide, 65% of the samples exceed these thresholds.
Risk threshold may be a tricky concept for some of our listeners. Could you explain it to us?
Yes, of course. So the risk thresholds are defined by BIOMIN due to worldwide practical experience and in the field, and scientific trials, and also according to the literature. So yellow means moderate risk, and up to red representing extreme risk with more than 75% of the tested samples above the risk threshold. So we can see that all regions are affected by mycotoxin. And then take into consideration global trade of raw materials. So the occurrence and concentrations you observe pose a potential threat to swine, poultry, ruminant, and aquaculture production.
Well, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. So tell me, according to your analysis, what are the main factors contributing to the patterns of worldwide mycotoxin occurrence that you see?
Well, as we know, fungi on crops in the field or in the storage levels have produced mycotoxins a long time. So we know that the environmental stress has a significant impact on this. And at the moment, climate change is the main trigger influencing mycotoxin prevalence around the world. So extreme scenarios such as desertification, floods, and fluctuation between wet and dry periods affect the life cycles of fungi. So weather conditions at certain growing stages, particularly flowering and harvesting, definitely influence the mycotoxin occurrence. And to illustrate this impact, I have brought some examples here. So soybean planting in Brazil was underway due to little rainfalls, and something similar happened in Argentina. And you can remember that this region was affected by the phenomenon called La Nina last year. So in the US, also the corn and soybean crops were affected due to damaging weather conditions during August in parts of the Midwest region. And also in central China, devastating floods in June and July caused also a huge impact on agriculture, damaging huge crops areas, including rice, vegetables and fruit. And the strong floods also occurred in Bangladesh with a lot of damage. So as you can see, these extreme weather events are increasingly present, impacting our lives and the production of the raw materials for food and feed production.
So in the world maps that you just showed us, there are many different mycotoxins in the mix. Do these occur in similar patterns everywhere, or is there a geographic variation?
Yeah, good point, Josh. I think to answer this question, let's go through the data. And we have a separate map for each region that shows the sub-regional risk. And let's start with the US and Canada. So as you can see here, the risk is extreme. And the gray bars indicate the prevalence of the main mycotoxins detected on all analysis performed. And we can compare with the prevalence of that same mycotoxins presented in the previous year. So the pictures of animals are colored according to the proportion of samples above the risk threshold for each animal species. So meaning animal colors indicate the risk posed to these species by the prevalence and concentration of each mycotoxin in all samples from this region. So clearly, DON is the one of the main concern in all species. As highlights from this region, in corn, we observed a high DON prevalence where 72% of the samples were contaminated with this mycotoxin, followed by FUM with 70% and ZEN with 40%. And also DGGS, corn DGGS calls our attention as it is highly contaminated with Fusarium mycotoxins. And we will show more details about it in the next slides, right? So here, let me guide you through in this slide. In the figure to the right, we see the co-contamination. So how many mycotoxins are present in a sample? Non-mycotoxin, one mycotoxins, or more than one. So in corn, we detected a high co-contamination where 60% of the samples were contaminated with more than one mycotoxin. Here in the left corner, you can see the prevalence of the main mycotoxins. And on the top, in the table, we can see the number of samples investigated, average and maximum values. So the average of contamination were quite high for DON, with more than 750 ppbs, FUM with more than 2,400, and ZEN 300 ppbs. So let's go to the south, and it started with Brazil, one of the most important countries in the region, producing and exporting raw material for animal production. So we detect a high FUM prevalence. 83% of corn samples were contaminated with this mycotoxin, followed by DON with 48%. FUM presented an average close to 2,300 ppb, with a maximum concentration of 56,000 ppb. So what is interesting in the maximum is the maximum values found for ZAM. That was 4,250 ppb. This high contamination can cause several clinical problems for the animals in the field, especially in the reproductive tract. So here we have the soybean data from Brazil. This important raw material was particularly affected by DON, ZEN, and T2 toxin. What was a surprise in the maximum found for ZAM, around 43,800 ppb. In Argentina, the situation was quite similar to Brazil. So corn was high contaminated with 2,721 ppb of FUM on average, followed by DON with 631 ppb. But however, the maximum found was high with more than 6,000 ppb.
All right, so now let's have a quick look at the highlights of mycotoxin occurrence in Asia. And for this, I'd like to bring Annalisa into the conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you. I want to start with the overview of Asia. And we see again this year that the risk remains extreme, mainly in South Asia as well as in China and Taiwan. The risk is still severe in Southeast Asia and East Asia, and the situation is different, and risk is moderate in Australia and in New Zealand. We see very high levels of the Fusarium mycotoxins again. Fumonisin are most prevalent, followed by deoxynivalenol and cerelenol. Interestingly, in this region, ochratoxin A and T2 increased in the prevalence compared to last year. Aflatoxin is still a risk for all of the livestock. A maximum of 2,495 ppb was found, and also cerelenol occurs frequently in 68% of the corn samples, and it reaches a maximum of 11,780 ppb. Okay, now I want to move on to the European data. We can see that the risk in Europe is still high to severe. The most prevalent mycotoxin found is deoxynivalenol, followed by cerelenol. And the risk in Europe is really mainly due to the occurrence of deoxynivalenol, particularly in corn. I want to show you some highlights for the overall region. Besides the high prevalence of DON in corn, we see a slight increase in the average contamination with cerealenone, reaching over 170 ppb. Also in cereals, we could detect deoxynivalenol at concentrations as high as 11,870 ppb.
And do we see a uniform pattern of contamination within Europe, or are some regions affected differently from others?
Yes, good point. The regions are differently affected. This is mainly due to the differences in climate, but also the grains produced. And in Central Europe, I want to focus on this region first. Really, deoxynivalenol is the main problem. Let me show you some examples of important grain-producing countries. In France, in wheat grains, we see they are moderately affected with deoxynivalenol and cerealenone, but still, deoxynivalenol occurs in more than every second sample, and a maximum of over 5,900 ppb was found. The co-contamination in wheat grains in France is moderate. But the picture changes a lot when we have a look at corn kernels in France. Here the prevalence of the Fusarium mycotoxins, fumonisins, deoxynivalenol, and cerealenone is very high. We see elevated levels of deoxynivalenol, over 1,000 ppb, and the average cerealenone concentration is higher than 300 ppb. This is a level that can already cause harm in animals. Moving to Germany, here we also see that corn is higher contaminated than wheat and barley. Deoxynivalenol is found in 90% of all of the samples, with an average of 960 ppb and a maximum of 5,406 ppb. Also, cerealenone is found in 40% of the samples. I would like to show you also the data for Hungarian wheat grains. Here we can see that deoxynivalenol is still the main threat, with an average of 1,560 ppb. But here we can see that also other mycotoxins, they are highly prevalent, aflatoxins, T2, and also ochratoxin. In Romanian barley, we see that all the samples that have been analyzed for deoxynivalenol, from those samples, 92% were positive, and they really show a super high average of 1,800 ppb.
What about the big grain-producing countries in Eastern Europe?
Yes, let's move on to the Ukraine. Here I want to show first the contamination in wheat grains. The sample number just gives a first impression of the contamination, but we see that deoxynivalenol is most prevalent in 68% of the samples, and it shows an average concentration of 803 ppb. The highest concentration found even exceeded 6,400 ppb. In the Ukraine also, corn samples have been more affected. Deoxynivalenol, fumonisins, and cerealenone are most prevalent. The average contamination of deoxynivalenol is very high with 1,014 ppb. And in Eastern Europe, of course, I want to also present Russian data to you. In Russian corn kernels, the most frequently found mycotoxins are fumonisins in 61% of the samples, followed by T2, deoxynivalenol, and cerealenone. The average concentration of fumonisin is 1,018 ppb, with a maximum of almost 14,000 ppb found. Also, T2 shows an average of 82 ppb. T2 belongs to the A triiodicines, and they appear normally at lower concentrations than the B triiodicines, but at those lower concentrations, they show already more severe effects.
Any highlights for Southern and Northern Europe?
Yes, just very briefly. I want to present corn data for Southern Europe. Here the corn is strongly affected with fumonisins found in 95% of the samples, and a maximum of almost 12,800 ppb was found. Also in this region, it's interesting that the aflatoxins, they do play a role with an average of 17 ppb. And as a last highlight, I want to show data from Italy for corn silage samples. Please have a look at the average concentration of fumonisins. It's 4,210 ppb. And fumonisins were also prevalent in all of the samples.
So in Europe and in Central Europe in particular, corn is the most affected commodity. The main challenge for livestock seems to be deoxynivalenol. And wheat and barley were also highly contaminated in some countries. Is there anything else to add?
Well, I would add that we see T2 more frequently in Eastern Europe, that in Southern Europe, fumonisins and also aflatoxins should be considered. And for Northern Europe, that the most prevalent mycotoxin found is deoxynivalenol, followed by zearalenone.
All right, so let's move the focus a little bit. What is the situation in Africa and the Middle East?
We have quite some samples from this region. Let me show you first some results from Middle East. Here we can see that deoxynivalenol is the main threat for the animal species, and the fusarium toxins are most prevalent in this region. Now looking at all of the samples in Middle East, we can see that 80% of all of the samples were contaminated with more than one mycotoxin, so the co-contamination is high. And although the average concentrations are rather moderate, the maximum found for fumonisins, deoxynivalenol, and also zearalenone are high. Let's move on to Africa. The main risk in Sub-Saharan Africa is due to deoxynivalenol, followed by fumonisins. Also, the risk increased slightly in this region. We see in cereals that 92% of the samples were contaminated with deoxynivalenol, with a maximum of 917 ppb. In South Africa, the corn was mainly subjected to fusarium mycotoxins. Here, deoxynivalenol was the most prevalent mycotoxin in 95% of the samples, followed by zearalenone in 54% of the samples. Also, the co-contamination with 76% is quite high. And in South Africa, what is very interesting, we tested some straw samples last year, and it was quite a surprise how high the sand contamination in these samples were. An average of 1,664 ppb were found, with a maximum value of 2,900 ppb.
Alex and Annalisa, thank you for your insights into the different regions. The amount and specificity of the data are pretty impressive as always, so thank you very much. Now I'd like to shift gears and ask you all to think a bit about mycotoxin detection, in particular detection of the so-called usual suspects, the big four that are most commonly regulated. Of course, I'm talking about aflatoxin, deoxynivalenol, fumonisin, and zearalenone. And for this, I'd like to bring in Nowe, one of our mycotoxin experts at Romer Labs.
Hi, Josh.
Hi again. So Romer Labs has a new rapid detection system to detect exactly these mycotoxins, right?
That's right. We're calling it Aggregation Pro Reader system. And here's what it looks like. With lateral flow devices for the 4 big mycotoxins you just mentioned, and the Aggregation Pro Reader incubator.
So tell us, what will you be discussing in the few minutes you have here?
I will be talking about what the Aggregation Pro Reader system is, how it works with the Aggregation Pro Reader, and the test protocol in a nutshell. But first the question, what is that mycotoxin testers need and expect from a rapid test system? To answer this, I would like to invite you to consider a typical testing situation. I'm sure that many of you will recognize this. Incoming raw materials either at grain storage facilities, feed producers, you name it. Incoming raw materials are tested for mycotoxins. A decision immediately has to be made whether to accept or reject the grain according to internal acceptance thresholds. If it's accepted, the results may have a bearing on where it's stored. You can easily imagine how this could be a stressful situation. While one shipment is being tested, another truck is waiting or driving up onto the scale. Time is of the essence, so testers need results fast. There could be more trucks just waiting for approval to unload. To make matters more difficult, space is often limited. There's often no lab, just small testing locations at facility entrance gates, and conditions are dusty, you might expect when tons of grain are being loaded and unloaded. Furthermore, you can't expect operators to have extensive experience with diagnostic tools. In our experience, and this is what we're hearing from our customers, operators have little training in these techniques. Last but not least, it is often an overlooked fact that the ambition temperature can vary by a lot. This can have an impact on the efficacy of the technical equipment you're using.
It doesn't sound easy trying to detect mycotoxins under these circumstances.
That's why we have developed AgroStrip Pro Vortex. It is first and foremost rapid. Testers like those at our grain receptions are here can up the grain intake with a quick sample preparation, a 4-minute assay time, and the capacity to test 4 samples at once on site. I will say it again because we are proud of it. A 4-minute assay time. AgroStrip Pro Vortex is simple. Eliminate errors with a common extraction, dilution, and an intuitive walk-away operation. No sophisticated training process is required. The water-based extraction also means no handling or disposal of organic solvents. It is robust, which means it's built with the tough conditions like those I just discussed in mind.
So just because it might be a bit dusty doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice precision.
Yep, it couldn't have said it better by myself. And just to round out the first intro to the system, AgroStrip Pro Vortex features a streamlined testing procedure and the connectivity that testers have come to expect. Our test strips are blockchain enabled, and you can transfer your data to a PC or print it out with ease. The AgroStrip Pro Vortex is a complete system consisting of lateral flow devices for the detection of total aflatoxin, deoxynivalenol, total fumonisin, stearalenol, and the Aggregation Pro Reader. The AgroStrip Pro Vortex mycotoxin test strips are designed to cover a broad detection range in combination with high sensitivity in order to receive accurate results even at low mycotoxin concentrations. Here are some of the highlights, and don't worry if I go through the next slide a bit too fast. You can look all this up on romalabs.com at your leisure. Our aflatoxin strip offers a quantitation range from 0 up to 460 ppb. It also features a high sensitive method with a limit of detection of 1 ppb, the lowest available by LFD on the market. Our DON strip has a quantitation range from 0 up to 44 ppm, with a limit of detection of 0.1 ppm and a limit of quantification of 0.2 ppm. The test strip offers a broad detection range without compromising on sensitivity. AgroStrip Pro Total Fumonisin Vortex offers the same broad quantitation range from 0 up to 44 ppm, with the high sensitivity of a limit of detection of 0.1 ppm. And here's our SON strip. It has a wide concentration range from 0 up to 1650 ppb, with a limit of detection of 25 ppb and a limit of quantification of 40 ppb.
That sounds great, but I'm really interested in hearing more about that reader.
The Aggregation Pro Reader is much more than just a reader. It's got a built-in incubator and has a 7-inch display, and very important, all 4 slots operate independently, which makes it that much easier to use.
So how does all this work together?
First, don't laugh. Turn on the Aggregation Pro and choose mycotoxins. Then you have your extraction. Weigh in your sample and add the extraction buffer, bag, and water. Shake, shake, shake. Dilute and centrifuge. One thing I point out here, all 4 mycotoxins share a common 1:11 dilution.
Which means that you can test for all 4 mycotoxins from the same extraction, right?
That's right. And here comes the fun part. Put the strip in the cartridge and put the cartridge into the reader. The Aggregation Pro will prompt you for some information about the sample. And then you prepare the extract into the cartridge.
And then what?
Then you can do whatever you want to. Prepare another sample, read a book, watch a cut video. The Aggregation Pro Reader takes care of the rest. Incubation and timing are all automated. Results are displayed automatically when the test is done. Of course, you can get more detailed information for each sample. Just tap the information icon on your set. So let's sum up. The Aggregation Pro Vortex is rapid. Test 4 mycotoxins at once in just 4 minutes. With a common extraction and dilution and an intuitive walk-away operation, it's easy and really to use. It's robust, giving precise, reliable results even in the toughest of conditions. It is connected with blockchain-enabled strips and easily printable and exportable results. And last but not least, our experts are here to help whenever and wherever you need them.
So where can people find out more about AgriStrip Pro Vortex?
Just visit romalabs.com/en/agrostrip-pro. All you need and more is there.
All right, well, thank you, Nora, and congrats to you and the whole team for rolling out such an impressive test system. Now, as we know, there are more than just 4 mycotoxins out there. What about all those other mycotoxins, Annalisa?
Yes, exactly. In addition to the main mycotoxins that are well studied and subject to regulation, there are also other mycotoxins researchers are warning of, the so-called emerging mycotoxins. In BIOMIN, we offer the multi-mycotoxin analysis method Spectrum Top 50, which detects over 50 mycotoxins, including the emerging mycotoxins, in just one run.
So maybe for listeners not so familiar with these terms, what do you mean by emerging and masked mycotoxins? Can you help us out with the terminology?
Sure, it's a good question. The emerging mycotoxins are frequently found on agricultural commodities. There is scientific literature supporting that they have toxic effects and investigations, and also the European Food Safety Authority is showing increasingly interest and is publishing reports with risk assessment for these toxins. I also want to point out the masked mycotoxins very briefly. Here you can see a fungus, a mice plant infected by a fungus and producing a mycotoxin, deoxynivalenol. What can happen in the plant is that as a defense mechanism, the plants attach a glucose molecule. Now the molecule is called deoxynivalenol 3-glucoside. This is a masked mycotoxin. We call it like this because it cannot be detected anymore with conventional methods. What happens in the animal then is that in the gastrointestinal tract, the glucose is cleaved and the original deoxynivalenol is present and can harm the animal. Also, the EFSA, European Food Safety Authority, highlighted the importance of considering the occurrence of those masked mycotoxins. Now I want to show you an overview of our results with the Spectrum Top 50 method. 2,878 samples have been analyzed, and the mycotoxins are listed in the left according to their abundance. Most prevalent was deoxynivalenol, and in red we see the masked mycotoxin, deoxynivalenol 3-glucoside. It was present in 42% of the samples, and in blue the emerging mycotoxins. And here ovaricin, alternariol, and amiantins have been very frequently found. And just to give you an idea of what we know about those emerging mycotoxins now, for modiniformin, it has been reported that broilers are very susceptible. It is genotoxic and can have negative effects, particularly on the heart, but also muscular weakness, respiratory distress, and immunosuppression have been described. Ovaricin and amiantins showed negative effects on the immune system, and accumulation in fat-rich tissue was shown, although to a very low degree. Alternariol showed no acute toxicity, but still the chronic effects needs to be investigated. And in lab experiments in vitro, we see cytotoxicity, mutagenicity, as well as effects on reproductive and immune system.
So let me ask, what about the prevalence of these emerging mycotoxins?
Yes, I want to show you their global occurrence based on our data from 2020. We see they are globally present and they are highly frequent. I show you in blue the two emerging mycotoxins most often found in a different region in different commodities. And again in red, the masked mycotoxin, the oxynivalenol 3 glucoside. And another mycotoxin I have not mentioned yet, nivalenol in orange. What we can see is that the emerging mycotoxins are frequently found in the different commodities and globally. And looking at the occurrence of the masked form, we see it was found in 80% of all corn samples in South Africa. So this was pretty interesting for me. And also in 42% of wheat samples in Europe and 42% of finished feed samples in Asia. The data is also interesting for nivalenol. It was frequently found in South America and Europe. And this is important because nivalenol is also a trifluticene and it can significantly add up to the trifluticene contamination. It can cause maybe even more toxic effects than the oxynivalenol, and it can also show synergistic effects with the oxynivalenol.
Well, many thanks to you, Anneliese, for these insights into multi-mycotoxin analysis.
My pleasure.
Let me now steer our conversation back to another relevant issue. And for this, I'd like to bring Alex back into the conversation. Alex, once you have test results in hand and you've identified a contamination issue, you're probably going to want to mitigate the risks to your animals. How can BIOMIN help with that? What can BIOMIN provide to the market?
Great. As we know, the mycotoxins have different structures, and that's why different strategies are needed for their counteraction. So with this in mind, BIOMIN offers to the market the well-known MycoFix product line that works with three different strategies. So adsorption, biotransformation, and bioprotection. So adsorption via bentonite, it's a proven solution. It's gone through the full process of EU authorization for binding aflatoxins, mainly. Then we have the biotransformation components, contains funzyme for the degradation of fumonisins, the BSH for the breakdown of trichotoxins, and the MTV components, counteracting the zearalenone and ochratoxin. On top of this, MycoFix contains the bioprotection components to support and protect the liver and the immune system of the animals against the effects of mycotoxins. So the MycoFix product line, it's the most advanced tool for mycotoxin control. So to reach this level, BIOMIN cooperate with leading universities and research centers from all around the world. And there are several peer-reviewed papers published to prove the efficacy of these products, not only in vitro, but in vivo as well. But for more information about the products, please contact a BIOMIN representative.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. I'd also like to point out your website, which contains lots of technical information, survey data, as well as product information. You should see it on your screen now. And now I'd like to open up the Q&A session. Thank you to all the participants out there for all the questions that you asked. I'd also like to ask all of our panelists to join us on screen now. Well, the first question up seems to be relating to a BIOMIN topic, relating to the survey. It says, sometimes we find some mycotoxins at moderate levels. Can these moderate levels also impact the animals? Who'd like to take that?
I can take this one, Josh.
Go ahead,
thanks for the question. Yeah, definitely yes. I mean, there are several peer-reviewed papers showing that not only the really high mycotoxins contamination can cause impact, but also this moderate dosage or contaminations. So especially on the gut and immune system. So and definitely more and more information appear about this. and we can be sure that the animals will be impacted when they are present, especially at the combination that we show it today, more than one mycotoxin present. So definitely will impact the animals this.
All right, well, thank you. This next question, I believe, is going to be for you, Nowe, because it's talking about the reader that belongs to the AgriStrip Pro Watex system. And just says simply, how do the 4 slots work together on the reader? I know you said something about independent testing. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, they don't work together. We've designed the Aggregation Pro Reader to be able to carry out 4 separate tests completely independently. Each lot operates like its own miniature lab and delivers results whenever and ready, regardless of what's going on with the other slots.
All right, that's a clear answer. Thank you. We have time for one final question here. And this is a topic that we've touched on in previous webinars. What are examples for synergistic effects of mycotoxins? Right, who would like to take that? Annalisa?
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
We mentioned before already that nivalenol can show synergistic effects with deoxynivalenol. And one common example, because they so often co-occur, is deoxynivalenol and cerealenone, which can show synergistic effects. And one very interesting publication, it showed that the co-occurrence led to a very high impact on the intestine of piglets. So this is one example of synergistic effects.
All right, thank you. I imagine there's more information about synergistic effects on the BIOMIN website.
Yes, I tried to be quick.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you. And with that, we are now coming to the end of our webinar. As promised, you will be getting a few goodies from us. You'll receive an email including links to today's recording, the brand new BIOMIN Mycotoxin Survey annual report, the latest issue of Spot On from Romer Labs, and a link to a short on-site mycotoxin testing video within the next 24 hours. You'll also be prompted to take a short survey on today's webinar. It should take about 2 minutes to complete. By providing your feedback, you allow us to improve our webinar program and to identify future topics for discussion. We would appreciate your taking the time to complete the survey. So now it remains to me to thank our speakers, Alexandru Marchioro.
Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you very much also to Annalisa Müller from BIOMIN.
Yes, thanks to all of you. My pleasure.
And also many thanks to Nora Kogelnik from Romer Labs.
Well, thank you very much.
This is Joshua Davis from Romer Labs saying visit us at biomin.net or romerlabs.com to learn more about how we can help you develop a mycotoxin detection and management strategy tailored to your needs. Thanks for your attention and have a great day.